Hey there, Heather. How are you today?
I am good. How are you doing, Bruce?
Good. It's good to see you. Good to be back. Good to be chatting and getting it.
hmm
I get a word with you, right?
Awesome. Yeah, I know. I still am in love with the title of it. Uh, and you came up with it. It was perfect. I know it'd been rolling around your head for a while. So let's have a word. What's our word, Bruce?
Our word today is going to be strive. In the last podcast, we talked about change and
Mhm.
whether we're driving our own change or we're forced, into dealing with a change. But we really didn't unpack too much about, well, what are some ways to go about that, right? What are some ways to activate a change that you want to have? So I think a lot of it comes in. I don't know. I think about the desire to strive, right? To
Mhm.
strive towards something. When we say the word strive, what do you think about, Heather?
Well, funny you should ask about that because that's been something that I think, depending on my spiritual state and my mental state and kind of what end of the spectrum I'm on, based on how I'm connected with God. I think some days that striving is a beautiful, powerful thing that I'm excited about. And then if I'm out of whack with spending alone time with God and really getting direction from Him, and it starts to become about me and winning and my goals and how I look to other people and impressing anybody, then that striving for me uh, gets ugly, and it
Yeah,
starts to kind of crush my soul.
yeah. I have a visual of strive. You kind of drop the V and make it D, and I think of some of these, the beautiful professional runners, and you
Mhm.
see them. Their stride is almost like a glide, and you just see them striving to keep pace or striving to make up some ground, and there's almost a relaxed comfort, especially in the longer distance runners. You see them in a groove. They're striving and thriving at the same time. But I also see exactly what you're saying. We might be striving for something that is a struggle,
Mhm.
right? It's almost like we're pulling on a rope, and there's no tension in the rope, and we just don't seem like we're getting anywhere. And
Mhm.
so I think that's a great word to dive into and spend a little time talking about.
Yeah. I wrote not too long ago about the idea of the stride. The striving sometimes can lend itself to a lot of self propelled energy. And you mentioned the word stride, and I talked about getting how we get into God's stride, that we run alongside Him, that I did a couple half marathons several years ago. And one of the things I did was I would find a runner in front of me and I would kind of try to fall in. I wasn't a runner, so I didn't really know what I was doing or how to create a stride, but I would fall in line behind her and just try to make my feet hit the ground exactly the way hers hit the ground. And I learned how to run that way. And I think that's how we can operate with God. If we're in falling into God's stride, then that striving mentality kind of ceases and it's more of a stride than a strive.
So what are some ways then? Because if we want to, kind of talk about getting in that, striving to be closer to God and to be in His purpose for us and be all that He's intended us to be. What are some things that you do on a regular basis, or when you feel like you either need to get, or even in your routine that guides you in that direction?
hmm Well, the number one thing for me is reading and writing. I know you do the same thing hours before I do in the morning, that you've already done all your reading and your writing, but that's how I start my day. And if I don't start my day that way, I get off on the wrong foot for the rest of my day. And so I'm a little bit herky jerky and I'm responding and reacting and not letting God take the lead on that. So I get up and I read my Bible, I read some devotionals, I read some leadership books, bits and pieces of all those things. And, um, and when my head really gets untangled or detangled, I guess, is when I write.
Mm.
it just gets it out of me. So that's why I write in a blog format. It's just short and not always sweet, but to the point, and helps me kind of hash things out and get get back in line with God's plan instead of the Heather plan, which is not always
Yeah.
there.
Well, it sounds
What
like,
do you do? What
well,
do
it
you do
sounds
at these early wee hours of the morning, Bruce?
well. I think, and we can do a whole session on this about routine, about
Mhm.
establishing our routine. And for some folk, depending on what time of day. For me, it's morning. Well, I land, feet on the ground is, it varies, but pretty early. And my first go to is I do a program with a bunch of guys that I'm with called In His Grip Ministries, and we use an acronym called GRIP, which is God's Word, Reveal, Implement, and Pray. And so we're traveling through. We just finished Genesis today, reading a chapter each day. And then in that one chapter, which verse comes out to us, which ones of God's word comes out to us. So we write that down. And then the next step is, as we read it, pray on it, get quiet around it, what message is revealed to us about that? Maybe it's forgiveness, maybe it's trust, maybe it's obedience, maybe it's faithfulness, whatever sort of reveal. And you write a couple of sentences about what that passage revealed to me. And there's so much in Genesis to take a look at, and so we were in Genesis for the last 50 days, and then you write, what can I implement from that reveal? What can I do today in my life to take that message that was revealed and do something with it? And maybe it's patience. So maybe around relationships or interactions, I try to plug into my day to have more patience in it. And then when you wrap up the grip, you pray out. You say, you're thankful, however you want to pray, and close your time out. And so that's really my first thing in the morning, to kind of get to strive for a good stride, if you will. Then I write, and usually out of that will come a word. And I continue to post my daily, what I call mindset messages. And that's typically where the inspiration for those come, is in the morning. What word can I write? What does it mean? How can I activate what I took out of the verse that I read? And then I just try to be calm and do some physical exercise. And then I also try to send out an encouraging message to someone each day. So that's sort of a routine that I'm in. It's kind of a modified routine of some guys that I've spent a lot of time with.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I do think that routine is so important in that, because it's really hard to, I don't know, just that consistency of suiting up and showing up every day to prepare yourself and to get with God and let Him prepare you for what's coming. One of the things that can be, for me and my striving, like I said, it's so easy to get distracted from what God's plan might be, because it's usually a more humble serving plan than Heather's plan. Sometimes mine's like, well, I want to talk on a podcast, and I'd like to speak somewhere, and I'd like to, for my job, I want to sell two houses today. And everything is about, not that any of those things are bad, but like what you said, sending out an encouraging message. The only person that knows that you sent that message is you and that other person and God. And that's it. And there's something to that part of life that adds richness to our character, that this outward striving and successes it doesn't hold water to all the other stuff that the underlying things that God really cares about, where our hearts are formed like His.
Yeah, that's right. And I tell you, I get more out of sending an encouraging message than the person I send it to. I just know that, it's just the feeling of trying to demonstrate care, it is just very personally rewarding. And whether they get the message or it impacts them or not, I hope it does. But it's just something that says, hey, it's a reminder that the day's not about me. The world doesn't revolve around me. Although we all kind of have that, right? We all kind of get caught up in those things. But whether it's holding the door for somebody, whether it's, just sending a note on a text, or, man, maybe even old fashioned, maybe writing a note and sending it in the mail to someone.
Mhm.
I think it can have a real impact. So,
Yeah. I used to work for a man who, just one of my favorite leaders ever. And he is the owner of a multi-million dollar company. And pretty much, and I was the secretary, for lack of a better word. And so I was in charge of getting the mail out. And almost every day he would bring a note to me that was addressed to one of his clients, or someone that he worked with, that he had handwritten to them to mail out. He did it regularly. And that was I think that's part of why his business continues to grow and grow, is because people want to go back and do business with someone who pays attention and is grateful and expresses it. I was going to say, one of the things that in striving, kind of going back to that, is that it's important for us to have our goals. I know you have a lot of crazy goals, doing bunches of sit-ups and planks, or push-ups and planks and all that. We all have great goals, and those are all important. But I think, so how do we balance that with God's plan versus our plans? And I think one of the things I'm learning the hard way in most cases is that, um, we make our plans, but we hold them loosely. I think of the scripture about where it says, we all say, I'm going to go to this city and do this or that. But what we ought to say is, if it's God's will, we will go on this trip or do this podcast or whatever it is, if it's God's will or God's plan. And so we're free to make all the plans that we want, but that we also have to hold them loosely, because God has permission from us to tweak them, and
oh,
hopefully we'll be submissive to those changes.
yeah. So I think of that. A friend of mine shared this with me once, and it stuck in my mind, because I totally agree and align with what you're talking about. Make your plan, hold them loosely, but move. Get into action. And the message that my friend said is that God likes to hit moving targets. So if we are in fact moving, and we're moving on that path and
Mm-hmm.
striving to get closer to Him every day, then He will move us. He already knows the how, right? He's got all that already planned out ahead of time, I truly believe. And for us to be on the path, allowing Him to adjust us, allows us, I think, to keep striving, and knowing that the right outcome is there through faith, just staying in alignment.
Right. Yeah. It's a tough balance, especially if you are a naturally driven person. There's that hard balance of not getting your ego in the way of God's plan. But then if you're someone who just isn't naturally a driven, let's get going person, then sometimes you feel guilt, or um, less than, or not enough, because you're not striving like that guy. And so,
Yeah.
I would encourage anyone who is having those thoughts too, to listen to one of our previous podcasts about comparison, because I think striving really can coincide with that, bump heads with that, however you want to look at it, uh, because we start comparing what other people are doing, and comparing how early Bruce is getting up, or how whatever. Um, and it's important to keep that perspective, that God's got a unique plan for each of us. We need to listen to Him in that plan, and not try to be like anybody else. Like, where you're at today is okay.
I agree. And so I think the thing about a strive is really similar to the thing about everyone's stride. You said that you got behind the runners and sort of helped kind of pick up some technique, but it was still your own stride. It was your own uniqueness. It was your body frame. Everything about running was still within your, skeletal system, right? Even though you were picking up some things. So I would highly encourage as well that everyone will strive and is striving in their own journey, right? And that's why we're all unique. And that's why everything that we do when we align with God's plan is like the jigsaw puzzle, and the pieces come together. So the uniqueness is important. So why don't we bring this in for a landing, and I can
Yeah.
share what I wrote for the word strive,
Yeah.
and leave it out for everyone to ponder. You think that's a good idea here?
I think it's perfect because, as we know, you and I could talk all day about probably this one word, but we want to let people go back to their life. We'll
Yeah.
we're going to try to shoot for 15 minutes each time so that, if you pop on here, you can hear a word and be done. So
Right.
go for it, Bruce.
So, yeah, so in chapter 2 of Above the Chatter, Our Words Matter, the title of the chapter is Start and Keep Moving, Take the First Step. So when I moved to the word strive that's in that chapter, I wrote, some of the most consistent high performers stay in a continuous loop of striving to improve.
Mm.
They seem to thrive in the strive. So when you write the word strive, I take the 6 letters. S is simplify, focuses on improvement. So just thinking about getting a little bit better each day. The I is takes out the performance anxiety. We're just striving. We're not focused on an outcome. We're focused on improvement and the process. The R is reaches further each day. The cool thing about stretching is that or reaching for something is there's always a little bit more in the stretch. So reaches further each day is the R. The I is insists on being in the present, being in the present. So insists on being in the present means pay attention in that effort to strive and minimize distractions. That means find a quiet space. That means block your time. That means clean your desk so that nothing's on it to distract. That means put the technology away. Just find that time to be in the moment. So insists on being in the present. The V is validates from effort, not outcome. Kind of the whole theme of the word striving is it's the effort that matters. The outcome takes care of itself and typically in its own timing, right? And then the E for strive, to wrap it up, is expects progress, not perfection. So when you're striving, I believe I've always made better improvement when I've strived to improve and not strive to be perfect, because I think that's a very elusive and dangerous slope. Is having to try to set your goal at perfection. So that's what I had for strive today.
Awesome. Well, I hope you guys will be back. Next time, we're going to talk about the word massive. So we have some good stuff to talk about next week. So we'll see you then.
Can't wait. Take care, everyone.
Bye.